I had never played Final Fantasy VII, the original that is, and to be honest, I really didn't know what to expect going into Final Fantasy VII Remake when I started it about a year ago. The series has meant a lot to me ever since I started Final Fantasy XIII about 13 to 14 years ago. I've played quite a few since then, but I always avoided the original 7 and 7 Remake, not out of a lack of interest per se, more so just because I never really got around to it, despite the high praise the original got and then the remake when it came out in 2020. What I didn't expect is just how much I would end up enjoying Final Fantasy VII Remake. Nearly every part of the game, from the combat, the story, the characters, the music, and pretty much everything, hit the right notes for me, and it's quickly rocketed its way up to one of my favorite games I've ever played. While it may not be perfect, what I really want to do is just go over all the aspects of the game I really enjoyed to hopefully paint a cohesive picture of why I recommend it so much and why it means so much to me and millions of others. The best place to start, of course, is the story and the characters. Final Fantasy VII starts with you as a former soldier that's now turned mercenary working for an eco-terrorist organization called Avalanche. Their main goal is to take down the evil corporation Shinra. The message of the game isn't too difficult to decipher. You have an evil corporation using up resources of the planet that is polluting the planet. I mean, it's very easy to understand what that's meant to represent in real life in terms of pollution, the environment, and so on. What I find so interesting about the story, though, is how it gradually unfolds to become much more larger in scope than what it initially appears to be. It is not just attacking a corporation, destroying the big boss, and there's that. There's many more factions, layers, and antagonists that you uncover throughout this game, as well as later on in the sequel, that make you keep having you guess, really, in what's going to happen, as well as what's going to happen with the characters. And what I really do like about this story is how, while it only takes place in Midgard, the city feels alive. This feels like a real-life city built by a real-life powerful corporation that has different social classes, different laws, different areas and cultures within the city itself. And you very much feel like Midgard itself is somewhere that could exist and is plausible. Everything's fleshed out and it's deep, and it's just a joy to really be in, or at least explore, even though some of it's not a joy. For example, as you walk around the various slums throughout the game, you get a lot of background dialogue from the various residents of the slums, hearing how they live. You get to see the dire conditions many live in, but also the various cultural practices that many take part in. You got the various games they play, the stores, you hear some songs, stuff like that, and sometimes you see parties. There's even one area which essentially is like a little Las Vegas type area. It helps that the art style and graphics are just phenomenal across the board. There are various points we can see large portions of Midgar or sections of it, and it's just jaw-dropping. I have so many pictures of me just staring at various parts of Midgar where everything is so detailed, everything looks unique, and there's so many gorgeous skyboxes. Even when you're just on the ground walking around, the different areas, even if it's just a scrapyard, they look very detailed. The sky looks beautiful. Everything about it is what you would expect from a AAA game, but it's definitely one of the best I've ever seen, especially when you play it on a PS5 or PC. What really elevates this game beyond various other JRPGs, though, in my opinion, is just the outstanding characters and writing that goes along with them. The main protagonist, Cloud Strife, has to be one of my favorite protagonists, not just in a Final Fantasy or JRPG game, but in any video game ever. On the surface, he checks all the boxes for what makes a good protagonist. He's witty, he's badass, he has a cool design, and he's a nice eyes to see the story through, given his lack of knowledge in some areas, but also extra knowledge in others. Part of what makes Cloud as a character so compelling isn't fully told within this story. It is split up between this and Rebirth and will be the third game. But Remake does manage to delve into his PTSD and his lack of being able to handle his past trauma and the events that made him into who he is today. And to be honest, I find that a really cool aspect of his character, and that makes him more relatable than many others. While on the outside he appears as a pretty generic anime boy, who yes is badass, but may not have too much depth to him. The trauma he suffered in his past and how it connects through the whole story, the villain of Tifa and everyone else, makes it a very nice puzzle, not only pieced together, but also really makes you feel for him more than I really have most other protagonists in games I've played. Another aspect of his character that I think they highlight really well is that he isn't perfect. He lacks a lot of social skills. He sometimes is kind of an asshole, especially when he's trying to appear badass, and he doesn't always get along with everybody. And sometimes you're going to take the other people's side even though you're playing as him. Throughout the game, you do see him open up. You do see him learn how to interact with other people, and you start to get hints and clues as to why he lacks on these skills in the first place. And it makes for such a compelling, not only first playthrough, but also replay throughs when you figure out the little details, when you like, oh, when you play Rebirth and you notice, oh, I see what they're hinting at here at the beginning. And it really makes him seem more believable despite his very, anime appearance and just over-the-topness that the story has. Cloud also suffers a form of amnesia. He doesn't fully remember all the events that took place in the past, and the ones he does are very much his accounts might differ from others. And I find this also another very interesting part about his character, because as the game goes on, you start to realize, oh, maybe some of the things he said or you've seen through his eyes aren't completely correct, or they are correct, but they're put in different areas, timeline-wise or context-wise, that he doesn't have, and you find out through other characters. This is something that carries on much more into the sequel and Rebirth and presumably the third part, but it's another thing that makes it very exciting to keep going through your story because you're kept on your toes so much and you're given a lot of context, but because you're seeing it through Cloud's eyes, it's often missing certain pieces. Cloud isn't the only compelling character though. The rest of the main cast is just fantastic in almost every way, in my opinion. Tifa, Barrett, and Aerith are the other three main characters in this game that you spend a substantial amount of time with, and each of them has various qualities that I think make them very compelling characters, especially Tifa and Aerith and their relationship with Cloud. Tifa, for example, is much more reserved and anxious and traumatized character, but on the outside she appears badass, strong, and powerful. You compare that to Aerith, who maybe doesn't appear as strong or powerful, but is much more in tune with her emotions, is much more outgoing, and is much more able to handle what happened in her past, despite her past also having a lot of trauma. In the way these characters bounce off of each other, whether it be just through general banter or them trying to understand each other's emotional trauma and emotional moments and what they're dealing with, is just it's so much fun. And I really just appreciate them and they feel alive. And I think it's one of those things where once you play the game, you really realize how many other games fail to develop characters the way Final Fantasy VII Remake does. Now, in this one, Tifa, Aerith, and Barrett don't get as much development as they're going to get in the sequels, especially Tifa, Barrett. Those two, you find most of their backstory, and you get a lot more with them in the next game, though you do find out some in this. But even with you not having the full context and the full emotional weight of what their backstory is, since you don't get it yet, they still, I think, have a lot of depth, and the way they also bond with Cloud throughout the game, and going from more uneasy, not knowing how to handle him, to generally being friends and part of a crew, is a really satisfying progression. A lot of this is brought to life just due to the outstanding performances from the voice cast. The main cast all did a phenomenal job, and they all deserve their flowers for how they handled their characters. Britt Baron, for example, does a really good job at capturing Tifa's more soft-spoken side while also delivering good humorous lines and back-and-forth banter at the rest of the crew. Whereas Brianna White is able to make Aerith look cheerful, happy, while also delivering very believable emotional performances, especially during the scenes when Aerith talks about her childhood as well as her previous background. I also want to give a shout out to John Bentley as Barrett. Barrett is a very impulsive and hot-headed character, but who has a good heart, who's a good father, and very much cares for the people around him. John Bentley manages to capture just how impulsive he gets. He manages to do the angry scenes with Barrett, where Barrett starts yelling, starts freaking out, but all of a sudden will revert to being nice, good-hearted once he realizes, hey, I need to calm down. It's a delicate balance that can appear very awkward and sometimes a bit of a tonal switch at times, but John Bentley does a fantastic job, and really a lot of the cast, what it comes down to is, if you were to imagine Barrett speaking when you were playing the original Final Fantasy VII, hearing John Bentley voice him, for example, is exactly what you would have heard. And to me, there's no higher praise I can really give to voice actors than that. I also very much enjoyed the combat and progression of Final Fantasy VII Remake. The combat system is no longer turn-based like it was in original Final Fantasy VII. It is now an action-based combat system. The gameplay loop is simple enough. You can attack with a light attack, heavy attack, you can dodge, you can block, and as you do those things throughout a battle, you're able to use these bars that fill up, and you can use those bars, use weapon abilities, magic attacks that come in the form of materia, as well as sometimes items and summons as well. Don't let the first impression fool you though. The combat has a surprising amount of depth and versatility within it, as well as a great amount of variety. One of the things that adds depth to the combat system is the stagger system. The stagger essentially allows you to build up a certain bar below the enemy's health bar, and if you get it full enough, you can make the enemy immobile or take more damage or both for a certain period of time. The stagger system is great because not only does it have a goal every battle of you wanting to stagger enemies so you can do more damage, some fights will give enemies certain debuffs, take away certain buffs they have, or give you certain buffs for staggering the enemy. So different fights, even if they play out similarly mechanically or have similar design or whatnot, can actually end up being different if the stagger criteria or effect ends up being different. The characters themselves all play in a very unique manner as well. Like a regular JRPG, the stat boost characters get as they level up does differentiate them some, but each character also has their own abilities to get through their weapons, as well as their own upgrades to get through their skill tree that can further differentiate them. For example, Cloud is more of an all-rounder, kind of a jack-of-all-trades type character. His stats, they go up across the board about evenly, a bit more tilted towards attack or defense, but you can kind of customize it whatever way you want. He has a lot of fun, unique abilities. For example, he can go into a kind of parry type stance where if he gets attacked, he'll launch back with a strong attack that often staggers the enemy or fills up the stagger bar very high. He has attacks that allow him to rapidly hit multiple enemies at once, and he has attacks that allow him to close the distance or do a high-powered single one-enemy attack. Compare this to Barret, whose most of his attacks are more focused on long range. He has an attack called Overdrive, which allow him to shoot multiple bursts of a high-powered kind of explosive round at once. He has what is my favorite ability in the game, Maximum Fury, where he uses all of his ability bars just to shoot as many bullets as he can in a short period of time, and it never gets old doing it. These different abilities each character can use is just so much fun, and unlocking a new weapon or finding a new weapon, however you do it in parts of the game, is always a joy because you don't know what ability you're going to get, and they're all so satisfying to use, and even if you think one's bad, they somehow, somewhere might have a niche and a unique setup that you can do. Another thing I really like about this system is that each weapon itself has its own little skill tree that you can upgrade. As you level up and as you defeat certain enemies on the hard mode difficulty, you get these points you can use that allow you to get sometimes just basic stat boosts, but they also give you certain unique niches, such as, for example, the magic sword Cloud can use will obviously focus more on magic damage. He has a sword that focuses on physical damage, so each has its own upgrade tree. And I just think that's really cool, and it adds another layer of complexity and depth, so when you choose your weapon, it's not just weapon 1 is stronger than weapon 2, it's weapon 1 has more attack than weapon 2, but maybe less defense and maybe less in terms of charging or whatever. There's so many variations and play styles you can do just by choosing a weapon and the skill trees within them. It also feeds into a very satisfying feeling of progression because you're not only leveling up throughout the game, but you're constantly getting these points that allows you to see, oh, maybe I can get a stat boost here or a small ability here. And it also gives you incentive to do it on a higher difficulty or go do extra side quests so you can get these extra upgrades. I mostly talked about Cloud and Barret earlier, but I do want to go through how fun Tifa and Aerith are as well. I mentioned earlier how Tifa has punch-based attacks, but what makes her so fun is that she's focused on helping deal more damage while an enemy is already staggered. She can increase the damage that an enemy takes while they're staggered, so she's kind of a support character in that regard, but she also has very high mobility. She can dart around the field, and she has some really fun attacks where sometimes she's attacking all over the place at once and doing a little bit of damage, but doing a lot to different enemies. She has a little orb she can spawn, which pulls enemies in, and she's very just fun to use in general. Aerith plays more like your stereotypical mage. She does high magic damage. All of her abilities are based around magic attacks, like being able to cast 2 magic attacks at once, having a little fairy thingy. I don't know what it is really, but it flies around you, shoots magic as well. She can also heal the party with her prayer materia. She's not as unique as, let's say, Tifa is in terms of action-based combat, but she's still really fun. And what I like about her is you can break the game more with her because you can get her magic attack to ridiculously high levels. I'm talking probably like over 1,000 magic attack, which is just insanity in this game. The summon system is also really cool, even though it's kind of inconsequential, to be honest. You can use a bar or two to summon a powerful entity after you stagger an enemy, or your own health gets lowered down to near death state. They're really cool. They're really badass. They're kind of inconsequential because you only get to summon them a few times throughout each chapter, and they're kind of dependent on how big the arena is. But I think they're just a fun and neat addition. The sequel, I think, does it better. But in this game, you do have some really cool ones. You have Bahamut, who's my favorite, who shoots just a giant, like a meteor beam from the sky. You have Leviathan. You have Ifrit, Shiva, some of the stable classics. Again, they aren't super, like, it's something you're going to use all the time per se, but they're a nice addition, and you can see the blueprint of what would make it great in the sequel. All this is tied together by the materia system. The materia are essentially little orbs that you can insert into your weapons or armor to give you various abilities. You have basic ones like your healing, your different types of magics like fire or ice, but you also have some that get much more wacky. You go up from there like poison, you have some that give you straight up stat boost, and you have some that give you an extra damage boost if you dodge. Various kinds of materia you can use to customize and use to your advantage for each individual battle. What I really like about this system in Final Fantasy VII Remake is that it allows each character to keep its uniqueness with its weapon abilities and its various stat upgrades, while also giving you an extra degree of customization for certain battles. A good example of this is when you're playing on hard mode. There are some enemies where you want to focus less on offense, so you might equip more stat boost abilities, more materia that allow you to dodge easier, or maybe get extra bars so you can continue healing yourself. Other battles, you may want to just do as much damage as possible, so you remove some of your HP boosts or whatever. You fill up completely with magic, completely with materia that allows you to attack first in battle or recharge your abilities faster. And being able to customize these on the go after every single battle gives an extra layer of depth to the combat, along with all the different abilities, character playstyles, and stat upgrades and all that. I also think the game does a really good job at spacing out when you get your materia as well as your weapons. You encounter a new weapon or materia pretty much every chapter. They're not all bunched up together, so you're not scrambling to learn how to use it right away or getting them all at the very end where it all feels kind of useless. The game doles it out at a very regular pace, so you always feel like you're getting something new. Oftentimes they'll be very useful, you can experiment with them, or at the very least might seem a little bit fun or interesting. As a whole, I love this combat system. There's so much depth to it, and each character feels very unique, and I just never really get tired of it, to be honest with you. The various abilities you get keep the game fresh. You get a constant stream of progression, so the game never gets old as you're going through it. And the sound design, feedback as you hit enemies, visual design, all of it's fantastic. This is probably my favorite battle system in any RPG that I've played to this date. And the only game that's come close to it is the sequel, which actually improves on it. But as a whole, I think if you're looking for an RPG with an excellent battle system that is action-based, Final Fantasy VII Remake is the best out there, and still is to this day. I do want to give a quick mention to hard mode. The difference between hard mode and the other difficulty levels is that your magic points don't recharge in hard mode. Hard mode ends up becoming basically two types of gameplay. One is setting up your character with the correct materia and fighting harder enemies. Just a general difficulty boost that makes you prepare a bit more in general, which I like a lot. The other is doing MP management to make sure you're not overusing magic or healing materia as you go throughout the levels and the chapters. It's a fun addition. I don't like it as much as the main edition because you kind of have to be max level and maxed out a lot of your stuff, so you're not really progressing as much. But I want to mention it because it's still a good time, and I think it showcases the depth and how good the combat system can be, even if I tend to enjoy just the regular playthrough more. As expected from a Final Fantasy game, the music is legendary. All of it's a banger. Most of them are remakes or reimagines from the original Final Fantasy VII, but that's not a problem because the original Final Fantasy VII has an amazing soundtrack in its own right. I really like pretty much all the battle themes. They've added a few new themes as well, such as Midnight Rendezvous, which I really appreciate, and I think they all just sound really good. I mean, I usually like to try to find some type of fault in something, but in terms of the music, it's a classic. It's one of the best music soundtracks you're going to find in any game, just like pretty much any other game in the series. The game also just looks amazing. Graphically, it's beautiful. It's so detailed. The textures look great. Character models, for the most part, look pretty good. A few sometimes in the non-cutscenes look a little bit odd, but most of the time it looks good. All the background, the environments, the draw distance, the particle effects, oh my god. The fire, the thunder. Sometimes when you're launching the high-end spells, it's just like, wow. Even if it's not the most optimal time to do it in the game, you just want to do it because you just want to see all the effects fly, and it just looks so cool and satisfying. The game also performs very well, at least on the PS5. I heard the PS4 and PC versions may have their own issues, but on the PS5, very few issues. I can't even recall anything major except for maybe a very slight drop here and there when transitioning between areas. But, I mean, it looks good overall, and it's very well polished, too. Very few glitches, if at all, and again, they're usually extremely minor visual ones, if that. Now, the version of Final Fantasy VII Remake on the PS5 and PC is called Final Fantasy VII Remake Intergrade, and what's different about this besides the visual upgrades, it actually comes with a new optional DLC starring a brand new character, and while a lot of the same things I love about Final Fantasy VII Remake carry over, there are some differences I do want to talk about because it is very worthwhile playing. The story is pretty simple. You play as Yuffie, a foreign ninja from the land called Wutai, who once was at war with Shinra. Wutai lost that war at unspecified time before this game started, and Yuffie comes to Midgar in order to try to find the quote-unquote ultimate materia to be able to extract her revenge and destroy Shinra with it. You have a companion named Sonon, and you also meet a few different members of Avalanche and various people in Midgar you did not meet through the main game, but the story itself is really nothing too special. I do like the ending a lot. It does hit a lot of emotional beats, but the rest of the DLC, it's a fun little side story. It's pretty much what you would expect from a DLC that is only about a few hours long. The best part of the DLC is by far Yuffie, though. She's very funny, immature, but she does grow throughout the game. She has a very unique personality. She's very lively, but also in terms of a gameplay sense, she is extremely fun to play as. She's a mix of a range and close range attacker. She has a lot of cool martial arts and magic attack, and she's just very unique from the rest of the cast. I also really enjoyed the boss fights in the DLC. There's two major ones, and both of them are great, one at the end of each chapter. Besides that, not too much is different from the main game. I don't want to spend too much time on the DLC because while I do enjoy it a lot, it is just Final Fantasy VII Remake 1.5, I suppose. It's a bit more of the same, just instead you play as a new character and the story is a bit less consequential. Still very much enjoyed it, and I think it's very much worth playing because Yuffie, you get to see her backstory a bit more, and she's just a really fun to play as in general. Now I hope you can see why I loved Final Fantasy VII Remake so much and why the game means so much to me. The game may not be perfect, but my objective for this video was more to show why I thought the game was good, because at least online, there's no shortage of critical analysis and negativity when it comes to various entertainment projects, just like Final Fantasy VII Remake, but sometimes I think we need more voices that can more accurately show why sometimes we enjoy things, and that was kind of my objective here. This is a game I love very much. It's a part of a series that's arguably my favorite series ever, and I really want to highlight all the aspects I think come together to make the game so good. Anyways, that's going to be the end of this video. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and let me know below if you guys have played Final Fantasy VII Remake and what you thought of it, and if there's any other games you want me to talk about next. Have a great one.